Under the brilliant lights of Hollywood, there is a man who had to sacrifice almost everything to keep himself. That is Morgan Freeman. Once growing up in the harsh racial discrimination of the American South, abandoned by his parents at just 2 years old, losing his grandmother, the only support from a very young age, once nearly drowning. But then, in a way no one expected, that boy Morgan stood up, stepped onto the stage, and turned pain into strength, becoming the owner of the prestigious Oscar Award, a cinematic icon with over half a century of dedication. But today, at the age of 88, those tragedies have never left him. The chronic pains extending to the present, the obsession from the sudden death of his granddaughter, and the loneliness after 2 broken marriages. What really happened to Morgan Freeman? And why does the life of that man, like God, make millions of people unable to hold back tears when looking back? Morgan Freeman, or more precisely, Morgan Porterfield Freeman Jr., was born in 1,937 inches, Memphis, Tennessee, a place where, for many black people at that time, life did not begin with dreams, but with deprivation. When Morgan was just 2 years old, his parents decided to leave the South for Chicago, hoping to find work and a less harsh future. The little boy, Morgan, was left behind with his grandmother in rural Mississippi, amid red dirt roads, endless fields, and the suffocating atmosphere of the Jim Crow era, where racial segregation laws cut through every hope like sharp blades. Interracial marriage was forbidden. Schools for black children were so underfunded that they only operated 4 months a year. The boy Morgan had to study in a cramped classroom with worn-out books and teachers who always seemed weary. "I grew up feeling deprived," Freeman once admitted. Those words carrying a long, drawn-out sigh across the decades.
But when I was a boy, I was only allowed into one of these doors. One said white, one said color.
He played with his older sister, listened to singing drifting from the distant church, and those moments brought brief joy, like the summer trains that carried him to Chicago to visit his parents. There, he was held close, fed rare full meals, and dreamed of a reunited family. But then autumn came, and Morgan returned to the familiar reality: poverty, separation, and the absence of steady affection. Those cycles repeated, teaching him a bitter lesson that joy is always fleeting and loss is inevitable. Gradually, an emotional wall formed. Morgan no longer trusted easily, stopped expecting too much, and learned to endure in silence. In Mississippi, the sweltering summer afternoons became nightmares, so he and his friends decided to jump into a pond to escape the stifling heat. It was a reckless act, because he didn't know how to swim, and his body was too frail from prolonged malnutrition due to scarce meals. After a few struggles, he sank to the bottom. Water flooded his lungs. Darkness closed in so quickly there was no time to feel fear. Fortunately, passers-by pulled him to shore when he was nearly unconscious. But the nightmare didn't end there. It led to weeks in the hospital, severe pneumonia, and a lung abscess. Freeman rarely mentioned the details later, only saying briefly, "I learned very early that my body was not something reliable." That brush with death left a profound mark. Morgan began to understand clearly that life is finite, that everything can end in a single careless moment. This helped shape an unusually calm Morgan, one who carried that quality into his later philosophical roles, such as Red in The Shawshank Redemption, where he speaks of hope as something dangerous but necessary. And in the midst of that cold world, his grandmother became Morgan's entire universe. She held him close every nightfall, her voice the only lullaby that convinced him he was still loved. Those early years passed in hardship, but it was okay, because he had her. In Freeman's memory, her presence was the only safety in a society that constantly reminded him he was different. Morgan also found another small but miraculous escape The school stage, the plays, the little performances, where for a moment he could become someone else. On stage, he was no longer the abandoned poor child, or the black boy forced to lower his eyes under contemptuous stares. He could speak, stand tall, exist. His teachers quickly recognized that special talent. At age 12, he won the statewide drama competition in Mississippi, a brief joy amid an ocean of hardship.
I was only 8 years old, but I knew this was my calling. This was my destiny.
But even in those rare moments, reality refused to let go. When Morgan was 6, his grandmother passed away. Without any warning, the one person who made him feel he belonged somewhere was gone. Freeman later recalled that moment as a silent but deeply cutting wound that never fully healed. "I couldn't cry right away," he once said, "but immediately everything felt empty." For a child, that was the collapse of his entire world. But at this point, Morgan Freeman had no idea that what he had endured so far was only the prelude. After his grandmother's death, Morgan was brought to Chicago to live with his parents. That was the hardest adjustment, Freeman recalled, his voice still catching even after so many years. Chicago was a noisy and cold city. The Bronzeville area on the south side, where his family lived, had once been the battleground of the 1,919 race riots and remained steeped in poverty and violence. His father, a barber with few customers, and his mother, a maid who also worked as a nurse's aide, labored endlessly to bring home meager meals, but they were often not enough to fill the children's empty stomachs. "I know what hunger is," Freeman said later, his warm voice laced with bitterness, as if the memory remained fresh. The long years of hunger left Morgan increasingly thin and weak, perpetually tired, his body never truly healthy. Later, when he had become one of Hollywood's most powerful voices, Freeman once said very softly, "When you've been hungry long enough, you never take anything for granted again." At age 47, Morgan Porterfield Freeman, Morgan's father, died of cirrhosis. He had a long history of heavy drinking. The drunken episodes, the absences, and the inability to be a reliable support had made the image of his father faint and painful. The boy Freeman grew up observing it all in silence, unaware that many years later he himself would have to battle the same demon. "He was a mean man, and he was my father," Morgan once confessed in a late interview, his voice full of regret. That death was not only the end of a conflicted relationship, but also left an irreparable void in Morgan's heart. But life gave him no time to fully recover, either physically or emotionally. The South Side was a place where safety barely existed if you stood alone. To survive, the teenage Morgan had no choice but to join the Spiders, a local gang he entered reluctantly, only for protection from bullies. He had to commit minor crimes to prove loyalty, petty theft, or street fights, but his heart was never truly in it. On long nights, he lay awake, dreaming of a different life, one where survival didn't require fists. Amid that backdrop, education became one of the few lifelines. Morgan graduated high school, no small achievement for a poor black young man of that era. In 1955, he received a drama scholarship from Jackson State University in Mississippi, an invitation from fate promising a path to the stage. That was my chance to become somebody, he probably thought, with the eager heart of youth. But then, he turned down the scholarship, choosing a safer path by enlisting in the U.S. Air Force. The reason? He wanted to escape Mississippi, where racism haunted like a ghost, and the Air Force seemed like a stable way out, especially since many family members were veterans. He dreamed of piloting jets soaring through the sky, far from filthy streets and painful memories. "I wanted to fly high," Freeman once shared, those words carrying a longing for freedom he had never known. But that dream shattered quickly. From 1,955 to 1,959, He served as a radar technician, a low-level technical job, despite scoring high on tests and proving his ability. White superiors mocked him, called him slurs, and no matter how hard he tried, the door to becoming a pilot remained firmly shut. "Racism stole my opportunity," he recounted later, his voice full of bitterness. The feeling of being deprived, something he had known since childhood, was now amplified by an institution he had once believed would give him a chance. It led him to discharge early, just before the U.S. entered the Vietnam War, and returned to his acting dream as a form of rebellion, a way to heal the scars society had carved into him. Looking back, Morgan Freeman's young years resemble a journey across dangerous fault lines. Each experience quietly forged his soul, while silently accumulating, waiting for the moment to erupt. When Morgan Freeman set foot in Los Angeles in the early 1960 seconds, he arrived without any solid plan. All he had was an old suitcase, a few loose dollars, and a burning desire to stand on stage. Hollywood did not welcome Freeman like a dream. Those first days in Los Angeles were a string of doing whatever it took to survive. Sweeping floors, hauling loads, working fast food counters where he wasn't even allowed to keep tips, or typing in stifling offices. Money was never enough. Food became a luxury. Freeman slipped back into a humiliatingly meager diet. Raw eggs, cheap milk, sometimes just one meal for the entire day. The hunger he thought he had left behind in childhood returned without warning, gnawing at the self-respect of a grown man trying to believe he had worth. Many long nights, he slept on casting waiting room chairs, stomach growling, wondering if the dream was worth enduring all this. The turning point came in the 1,970 seconds when Freeman was invited to join the children's program, The Electric Company. For the first time in years, he had steady work, regular income, and most importantly, recognition. Children across America began to recognize his face and voice.
Okay, brothers and sisters and misses and misters, here's your daddy-o with the sounds to go. No shucking, no jive, and I'm telling you, your music's...
"It kept me alive," Freeman once admitted. But that joy faded quickly. Freeman became typecast in roles for children, cheerful, simple, safe. For a man who craved depth and seriousness in his art, that was a prison. He knew he was capable of more, but Hollywood wasn't ready to see him as a true artist. That frustration found an outlet in alcohol. At first, it was just a few drinks to forget exhausting days, then quickly escalated to liters of whiskey each week. Alcohol temporarily numbed the hunger, both literal and figurative. It dulled disappointment, soothed the feeling of being trapped, but the price was blackouts, mornings waking up with no memory of what he had said or done. And like a cruel loop, Freeman realized he was walking the same path his father once had, using alcohol to cope with pain. In 1967, amid those struggling years, Freeman married Jeanette Adair Bradshaw, the one person who believed he would succeed at that time. She had a daughter, Dina, from a previous relationship, and Freeman raised the girl as his own. Later, they had 2 more children, Morgana and Saifullah. The early years of the marriage were a warm pocket amid poverty. Jeanette managed the home, supported Freeman's pursuit of his passion, even served as his emotional anchor when every Hollywood door slammed shut. "Jeanette believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself," Freeman once shared, those words filled with gratitude and regret. But irregular work, financial pressure, long theater tours, and drinking made everything worse. Freeman gradually grew distant. He neglected his family, missing children's birthdays, silent dinners, intimate conversations that grew rarer. "I wasn't a good husband," Freeman admitted later, his voice slow and full of remorse. "I let work become my religion and traded everything else for it." Freeman loved his family, but he didn't know how to show that love while he himself was spiraling into chaos. In 1979, after more than a decade together, the marriage ended. No loud scandal, just exhaustion and letting go. Freeman rarely spoke much about this divorce, but those close to him knew it left a deep regret in him. The children were still there, but distance had formed. The marital failure did not immediately wake Freeman up. Instead, it pushed him deeper into isolation. He worked more, drank more, and closed himself off more. The emotional walls built in youth now grew thicker, making genuine connection increasingly difficult. In contrast to his personal wreckage, Freeman's career began to shine. In 1978, he received a Tony Award nomination for Best Featured Actor in a Play for the Mighty Gents, playing Zeke, a drunken drifter, a character that mirrored his own inner struggles. His raw talent, emotional depth, and the lived experience in his eyes were finally seen. A Drama Desk Award and Clarence Derwin Award followed, bringing his first recognition from the theater world. Freeman quit drinking in the mid-1970 seconds just before the electric company ended, and later drew on that experience to play a rehab counselor in Clean and Sober in 1988, turning pain into art. Still, theatrical success was only temporary relief. The personal cost kept mounting, and when the spotlight of stardom finally shone on him, Freeman would soon realize that fame was not a refuge. On the contrary, it would bring harsher trials, irreversible losses, and a prolonged nightmare right at the peak of his career, one he was not prepared to face. Freeman's rise to fame did not arrive like a triumphant march, but like a climb through fog. The higher he went, the wider the view, but the cold cut deeper. In 1987, his role as Fast Black in Street Smart, a ruthless yet conflicted pimp, earned him his first Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Freeman played the part with cold energy laced with wounds, as if recounting his own years with the Spiders gang. "I lived through those things," he probably thought quietly. And that performance stunned critics, turning doubt into acclaim. Just 2 years later, in 1989, Driving Miss Daisy arrived like a fateful affirmation. As Hoke Colburn, the patient, kind black chauffeur in the segregated South, he won a Golden Globe and his second Oscar nomination. Freeman embodied the character with quiet dignity, drawing from the prejudices he himself had endured. Whispers that black kids won't amount to anything, run-down schools, and loneliness under Jim Crow. The film won Best Picture at the Oscars, and Freeman became an icon of black dignity, a calm voice amid storms of injustice. Those successes stood like towering peaks, where he was finally seen and valued after years of being overlooked. From then on, he was no longer a middle-aged man waiting on the sidelines for a chance. He became a symbol of composure, wisdom, and morality, the face of characters carrying heavy moral weight. But those very dignified images unwittingly imprisoned him in another role. The man who was always strong, always steady, never allowed to show weakness. Freeman once admitted in a rare moment, "People think I have all the answers. The truth is, I'm just learning how to survive, same as they are." In 1984, as his career rose, Freeman married Myrna Colley Lee, a talented costume designer, the woman who brought the peace he had long craved. She was not just a wife, but a manager, a companion, someone who believed Freeman deserved bigger, deeper roles. They had no children together, but Myrna cared for Freeman's children from his previous marriage, turning their home in Charleston, Mississippi into a refuge far from Hollywood's noise. Quiet evenings, morning coffee by the window, drives through the South all felt like a dream compensating for his deprived childhood. "Myrna brought me back to myself," Freeman once shared, his voice full of warmth. But Hollywood is a machine that never sleeps. When fame exploded with The Shawshank Redemption in 1994, where Red's narration became an icon of hope, and Million Dollar Baby in 2004 brought him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, the distance began to grow. Long shooting schedules, constant flights, last-minute canceled dinners. all gradually created an unfillable void. Love didn't break from clear betrayal, but from prolonged absence that became habit. A close friend once spoke for Freeman. He didn't leave, he just never stayed long enough. Finally, they divorced in 2010 after 26 years together without loud accusations or flashy scandal. It was like a door closing, very softly, yet leaving an echoing emptiness throughout the house. The price was not just hundreds of millions in settlement, but the repeated feeling of failure, this time heavier, because Freeman was no longer young enough to easily believe he could start over. On long evenings, Freeman sat staring at his reflection in the window, wondering why roles about humanity came to him so easily while keeping his own family proved so hard. Then in 2008, a horrific car accident struck like a final blow from fate. At 71, on a road near Ruleville, Mississippi, Freeman's car suddenly veered off, flipped multiple times into a deep ditch. Metal screamed in the dark night, and he was trapped inside. Rescuers had to use hydraulic tools to free him, then a helicopter rushed him to the hospital. Hours-long surgery saved his life, but the consequences were irreversible. A pacemaker was installed after fainting from atrial fibrillation caused by the impact. His left hand suffered severe fractures, a shattered elbow, permanent nerve damage. From then on, chronic fibromyalgia tormented him daily, pain spreading through his arm, excruciating to the point of sleeplessness. Unable to grip, Freeman had to wear constant compression gloves to maintain circulation because his left hand was nearly useless. His lifelong passion for flying planes, the dream from his Air Force days, ended forever, along with long-distance driving. Freeman once said, half jokingly, half seriously, "I spent my whole life playing invincible people. Then one day, I couldn't open a bottle with my left hand." That accident was not just physical injury. It was a cruel reminder of life's fragility. He continued working Lucius Fox in The Dark Knight, Nelson Mandela in Invictus in 2009, with an Oscar nomination for Best Actor, but each role now carried deeper inner layers, as if he were confronting mortality through his characters. Invictus, with its message of forgiveness and resilience, became his way of healing, but the physical pain kept reminding him of finitude. The victories amid life's obscurities, overshadowed by irreversible losses, reshaped his existence, but the chapter that brings the most tears is still waiting, with an unimaginable family tragedy. One August afternoon in 2015, Morgan Freeman received a phone call that changed everything. Edina Hines, the granddaughter he had raised as his own daughter since she was a child, was taken from him forever at the age of 33. Edina had once lived with him and Myrna during the years of his second marriage, when her mother, Dina Jeanette's daughter from a previous relationship, was struggling. Edina was not just family in the legal sense. Freeman had raised her from a young age, watched every step of her growth, every artistic dream she pursued in New York. He had spoken of her with pride in the rare personal interviews he gave. The girl had her own light. Not mine, but entirely her own. Then came a horrifying morning when Edina's body was found with severe injuries inflicted by her boyfriend. The man, in a state of panic and hallucinations brought on by heavy drug influence, had acted wrongly. He was later sentenced to 20 years in prison for manslaughter. The way Edina left this world made even those who had witnessed many tragedies turn their faces away. For Freeman, that was the moment his heart truly shattered. Losing Edina brought back the pain of his childhood, when he had to watch his grandmother slip away in an accident he could do nothing to prevent. Those two losses, separated by decades, shared one common thread: absolute helplessness. No fame could save them, no money could make up for them, no intellect could explain them. All that remained was one question hanging in his mind: why did the people he loved most always leave in the most painful ways? In 2025, when news spread that he had been absent from many major events due to health issues, fans began to worry in earnest. Reports of a spreading infection, of his gaunt and exhausted appearance on television, turned the image of the man with the deep, authoritative voice into something heartbreakingly fragile. From then on, Freeman's life at 88 became a reclusive journey on his vast farm in Mississippi, where rows of trees and beehives were his only silent companions. A life that had already grown quiet after his divorce now became even more withdrawn. In his later years, casual conversations grew scarce, while dinners stretched longer in silence. He appeared in public less often, and each appearance left fans concerned. In 2025, reports about his health spread rapidly. A widespread infection that required hospitalization, absences from key events, and a frail appearance on screen slow steps. Black gloves on his hands, tired eyes that sometimes seem distant. He looks like he has no strength left, one fan wrote on social media, while another feared, is he suffering alone? Those moments stung the hearts of millions, because Freeman, the voice of God in Heaven Almighty, of hope in Shawshank, now had to confront his own fragility. Fibromyalgia, which Freeman once bluntly called terrible, has become an unwilling daily companion. At 88, the pain is no longer just a physical sensation, it is a state of being. It steals sleep, erodes the simplest joys like holding a book or walking in the garden. Every morning he wakes is a reminder that the price of continuing to live is not cheap. He still tries to maintain his health with gentle exercises, playing golf when possible, but every movement is a quiet battle. Even so, in the midst of that darkness, Freeman's resilient spirit still burns brightly. He keeps working, as if work is the only way to hold on to the light. In 2024 and 2026, he narrated profound documentary projects about faith, the universe, and the meaning of life. Series such as The Story of God and Life on Our Planet, where his warm, resonant voice still brings comfort to millions of viewers. He appeared in new films, though in fewer roles, and continued producing through Revelations Entertainment, focusing on humanistic stories. I keep going because I have to keep going, he once said simply, as if affirming it to himself.
Every morning starts the same. Coffee and crossword.
Yet every time he appears, waves of fake death rumors surge across social media. Cold headlines like "Morgan Freeman dies in agony" leave fans both furious and terrified. The truth is that he is still alive, still working. But those very rumors unintentionally reveal one thing. Freeman is now seen as a vulnerable human being, no longer an immortal icon. In the rare moments of reflection he has shared, Freeman once said that early prejudices and losses forced him to build a solid philosophy of life. But at 88, that philosophy is no longer expressed through eloquent speeches, but through quiet endurance. The gold earrings he always wears as sailor's tradition to save money for burial if they die at sea now carry a haunting meaning. They are not a pessimistic statement, but a calm preparation for the inevitable. As if Freeman has looked straight at the end, without fear, but also without embellishing it. All the tragedies from a deprived childhood, addiction, broken marriages, accidents, illness, and family losses now weave together into a deeply sorrowful tapestry, where every thread is a wound that has never fully healed. And when looking back at the entire journey, one has to admit, at 88, the accumulated pain of Morgan Freeman has painted a portrait of rare, silent endurance. A legacy that not only brings tears, but also forces us to ask ourselves how we would face suffering. Because Freeman's true greatness lies not in Oscar statues or legendary titles, but in refusing to let the darkness swallow him, even though it has always been there. From his deepest losses, Freeman still offers audiences a very personal kind of light. The calm of someone who has seen the abyss, yet still chooses to speak of hope. His life now, though fragile, still radiates that spirit, proof of an existence that turns pain into wisdom, tragedy into human depth. And as his story gradually approaches its conclusion, the question is no longer how much Morgan Freeman has endured, but what will we learn from the way he walks through the darkness, slowly, quietly, but never falling. And perhaps, when the screen slowly fades to black, what lingers is not thunderous applause, nor an endless list of awards, but a very strange feeling, silence. The silence of a man who has walked nearly the full length of life through intertwined shadow and light, who has tasted every salt, sweet, sour, and bitter the world has to offer, yet still chooses to speak to this world with a warm voice and a steady gaze. Morgan Freeman did not conquer life the way Hollywood stories usually tell it, but he has survived it, and sometimes that alone is a form of greatness. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like the video. It's the simplest way to support the channel in continuing to tell real-life stories behind the spotlight. And leave a comment below. In your opinion, what makes Morgan Freeman the greatest? His talent, his voice, or his quiet endurance in the face of fate? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next episodes, we'll dive even deeper into the dark sides, the secrets few dare to look straight at, of the icons the world once admired. The next story might make you think more than you expect. See you soon.